Good afternoon, good evening, and a very early good morning if you're in Asia. So this is our lecture 24 for the lecture series of corporate governance. I am Jun Yang. I'm the director of the Institute for Corporate Governance at Kelley School of Business, Indiana University. Kelley ICG has been here for 20 years, and we started launching this whole series of public lectures to provide a forum for scholars and practitioners to exchange ideas on governance research in November 2021. So this is 2.5 years milestone, and we have great co-hosts from the ECGI, European Corporate Governance Institute, and IU's Ostrom Workshop. So we also have our social media. You can follow us both on our website and our social media. So far, we've covered many different aspects of corporate governance. We start with board of directors, CEO market, exec compensation. We go to shareholder rights, hedge fund activism, indexer activism, shareholder voting. And we went somewhere in between to talk about CEO activism. And we talk about corporate culture, white-collar crime, and we spent a series of 6 lectures on ESG-related issues. Actually, our inaugural lecture was given by Alex Edman in November 2021. The title was ESG, Do We Need It and Does It Work? The answer is yes and yes. Our last month lecture was given by exactly the same speaker, Alex Edman. The title was, Can we trust ESG research? The answer is yes, perhaps, but you should look into the research more carefully rather than just listen to the rhetoric. And we talk about certification agents like credit rating agency as well as ESG raters. In the last block, we started discussing new challenges and opportunities provided by AI technology and big data. We talk about data privacy, cybersecurity, and data and technology. So the last lecture of this season, lecture 25, is a methodology lecture. It's 1 hour, and it's talking about applications of AI tools for governance research. So this is going to introduce AI technology, machine learning technique to mostly empirical scholars from various areas like finance, legal studies, accounting, management. So this way we can extract data better and, more importantly, analyze data better and make informative suggestions to policies. So that's on May 13th. It's a Monday rather than Thursday. The time is also different. It's 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. Hopefully, audience from Asia can also dial in. So that's 1 hour public lecture. Please take out your device and you can scan the QR code. I'll be here for 15 seconds. So this lecture has 5 more hours conducted in Kelley in person. So the doctoral students and assistant professors can join in person. You're welcome to join us if you want to come to Bloomington as well. For today, we have a wonderful lecture prepared by Professor Kelly Shue from Yale University. Before that, I'm going to introduce today's moderator, Mila Gasmansky-Sherman. Professor Mila Gasmansky-Sherman just received the Fuller and Meehan Endowed Professor of Finance at Eisenberg School of Management at University of Massachusetts Amherst. This is the first time that a woman scholar received this professorship from the University of Massachusetts. Congratulations to Mila. Mila is currently serving on the AFAC committee. This is a women's committee with AFA, American Finance Association. And she has done tremendous work to promote research and networking of women scholars in finance. Professor Gasmansky-Sherman specializes in empirical asset pricing, including hedge fund research, performance investment trading strategies, financial institutions, systematic risk, gender, and system dynamics. To me, that covers every aspect of finance research. Bravos. She received her PhD degree in management from the MIT Sloan School of Management, and her work was published in many prestigious journals, such as Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics, Review of Financial Studies, and so on. Professor Kosmansky-Sherman is associate editor of the Journal of Alternative Investment. She's a recipient of numerous research awards, including the awards granted from Q Group, NBER, Inquire Europe, and National Science Foundation. In addition, she has numerous governance appointments, including the SEC's visitor and the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve System. So without further ado, Mila, I'm going to pass the podium to you.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Shue. It's a pleasure serving with her on EFFECT. As Jung mentioned, it's academic female finance committee, which is affiliated with AFA. And if you have not checked it out, please check our website and join us at several meetings. Professor Shue's academic interests lie at the intersection of behavioral economics and empirical corporate finance. Her research has explored the Peter principle, which says that hierarchical organizations suffer because effective workers are promoted until they reach the level of incompetence. And we will hear more about this today, so I'm definitely looking forward to this. Also, her research looks at compensation, promotions, gender negotiations, the gambler's fallacy, contrast effects, and non-proportional thinking in asset pricing and executive social networks. Her research was not just published in top journals, it also has been very relevant and featured in numerous news outlets, including NPR, CNN, the Wall Street Journal, and Kelly was awarded very prestigious grants and awards, such as AQR Insight Award, the Wharton School Board's Award for the Best Empirical Finance Paper, and also UBS Global Asset Management Award for Research in Investments. Kelly is also very impactful as an associate editor, so thank you for that. She's at the Journal of Finance and Journal of Financial Economics, and also previously she served as an editor for the Review of Finance. Before joining Yale and teaching there, she also had an opportunity to be a professor and taught at Chicago Booth School of Business. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly. Thank you for this opportunity. And please, if you have any questions, look at the Zoom and you can type your questions in Q&A. So in the middle presentation, we'll ask some questions and also we'll have a chance to ask questions in the end. I will read those questions, but please write those questions so we can, so Kelly and I can go over them. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for organizing this, June, and inviting me. And thank you very much, Mila, for moderating this session for us. So it's my pleasure to be here to talk about incentives and promotions, which I think is a very interesting topic, very close to my heart. So let's think about the dual purpose of promotions. So when we think about who should we promote to a high-level managerial position, including all the way up to CEO, well, one role of promotions is to match individuals to job roles. So individuals differ from one another in their skills and abilities. Different jobs within the same firm differ in the demands they place on individuals. And what the firm can do is it learns about each employee's skills and abilities over time, and it can pick the person that is the best match for each kind of particular managerial role. On the other hand, firms also very much use promotions to provide incentives for lower level employees to work hard and invest human capital in the firm. So they basically use this promotion as a carrot to motivate people to work hard, with the idea that if you work really hard, you're more likely to be promoted. Okay. Now, why do firms use promotions at all to provide incentives? You could imagine that firms could instead just motivate workers with giving them pay for performance, okay? And if they do that, then they could just use promotions to maximize match quality, finding the best fit in terms of which person is the best possible manager. Now, however, in reality, what we find is that most of the variation in compensation within firms is across job titles rather than within job titles. So it seems like in order to get a big raise, you can't stay in your level and just get paid more. It's instead necessary to get a promotion. That's what is accompanied with a big raise. So again, why do firms use promotions to provide incentives? There have been various, I think, complementary explanations offered. The first goes to Prendergast and Tappel. They basically say, if we allowed managers to just give people more pay when they're doing a good job without tying it to promotion, that could lead to a lot of favoritism, okay? So because it gives the manager power to perhaps reward their friends and family and people who kiss up to them. So instead, if the organization has a rule in place which ties pay to visible promotions and job titles, then the decisions of the managers of who to reward can be more easily monitored, okay? So under this system, managers have less of an incentive to lie or act in a biased way. And further, workers are going to waste less effort on influence activities, which is they try to kiss up to a manager to get a raise within their current promotion, current job title. There's also research by Dickens and co-authors going back to 1987, which talks about notions of fairness and how notions of fairness really affects people's happiness and willingness to exert effort. So there's something I think that we all feel, which is that intuitively, it just seems really unfair that if we're the top performer within our team, that we're not promoted to the management role, okay? The firm might justify it by saying, you know, you're the top performer, but we think someone else is a better match for that position. But, you know, it would make people very unhappy, and that could lead to quite high turnover. Okay, so this is the context in which I've been launching my own research, essentially thinking about the conflict between these two purposes of promotions, which is one, to match people to jobs, and second, to provide incentives. So this led me to do research with my co-authors, Danielle Lee and Alan Benson, on this idea of promotions and the Peter Principle. So as I had mentioned, firms face a difficult choice of who should we promote. We could promote the best worker that would make the best manager, and this provides match quality, right? Alternatively, we could promote the worker who is currently doing the best at their current job. So this rewards past performance and provides stronger incentives. And further, if we don't do this, people might feel like it's very unfair, okay? Now, the key conflict we address is that these two strategies might conflict. So as noted in this early survey paper by Baker, Jensen, Murphy, the best performer at one level in the hierarchy is not the best candidate for the job one level up. The best salesman is rarely the best manager. Okay. So this led Lawrence J. Peter to write a very influential and I would say very funny book that I encourage you all to read. So this is called The Peter Principle. And in this book, Lawrence J. Peter notes that every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. So the idea here is people who are good at their current job tend to get promoted. And, you know, it's very difficult to lay off people. That's rare. So who stays in their position for a long time is the people who are not promoted further. So it's the people who are not good matches for their current level of jobs, okay? So what my co-authors and I do is we found the Peter Principle quite intuitive, and we wanted to test it in the data, okay? The Peter Principle predicts that firms promote based on current job performance at the expense of promoting the best potential managers. Now, key to our exercise is we are not claiming that firms are behaving irrationally or making a mistake in doing this. Rather, they're essentially facing a difficult question, which is they need to promote partly to provide incentives, and they actively choose to face this cost of not promoting the best potential manager, okay? So we're going to test this hypothesis using data from business to business sales. We're looking at sales because it's a classic setting where there's known to be a mismatch between worker and managerial skills. It's also an important setting because people working in sales-related functions actually account for more than 10% of the US labor force. It's convenient because we have reliable measures of worker performance, which is we see their sales credits. And it's also an interesting setting because it's one in which pay for performance definitely exists, right? So we look at a setting where we show, even though there's pay for performance, that doesn't seem to be sufficient as an incentive. It's still the case that firms are going to promote the best performing worker in order to provide incentives. Okay. So to give you a summary of our evidence, we find that sales performance strongly predicts promotion. Firms appear to discriminate basically in favor of strong sales workers, even though they are not the best possible managers, okay? In fact, we show that the firms have other observable predictors of managerial quality. So we find that those that have sales collaboration experience, so those are that have worked on very large sales projects, dealt with complexity, dealt with teamwork, et cetera, that positively predicts managerial performance, but this type of experience is not rewarded in promotions. We also show that the costs of mismatch are quite substantial. So firms could improve managerial quality by up to 30% if they just try to maximize match quality, find the best possible manager, okay? So this implies that firms are either making mistakes, which I don't think is necessarily the case, or it implies that the incentive benefits of promoting high-performing salespeople is really quite large, and that's why firms are willing to bear this cost of not finding the best possible manager, okay? And finally, we show that firms seem to be at least partially aware of this trade-off. So firms prioritize basically past performance less when the managerial role is really important, or also when they're already offering very strong pay for performance. So let me give you a little bit more background for our firm and our data. We're working with a firm that provides sales performance management software over the cloud. So this is essentially the software back end through which we have a lens onto business to business sales workers across 131 different firms in the US. In total, we observed just under 6,000 managers, about 40,000 subordinates, and about 1,500 promotion events. Okay. Now, what do sales workers do? Well, they sell stuff, right? And they're selling big ticket items in our data set because it's business to business sales. I wanted to highlight this Harvard Business Review stereotype of a successful sales worker, okay? So a very high percentage of top performers played organized sports in high school. There seems to be a correlation between sports and sales success, as top performers are able to handle emotional disappointments, bounce back from losses, and mentally prepare themselves for the next opportunity to compete. So these are pretty aggressive, competitive people that tend to excel in sales. Okay. So how do we measure sales performance? It's basically how much stuff you sell. Okay, and we have quite precise data on that. And then to smooth over lumpiness, we're going to look at a moving average of your sales over the past 12 months. We also see tenure as well as sales experience and compensation. Now, what do managers do? Now, sales managers are no longer involved in directly selling stuff. Instead, they're coordinating a team of subordinates and directing them towards sales activities. So the skill set differs a lot from that of workers. So in this quote, we find that one of the most difficult tasks a manager has is to prepare their salespeople for the constantly changing marketplace. They must be able to lead their sales teams into a successful future by navigating and adapting to uncontrollable and unpredictable changes in economics, technology, and finances. So this is, once you move into management, it really requires a different skill set compared to the lower level sales role. So how do we measure manager performance? We're going to measure manager's performance as her value added to subordinate performance. So for example, if suppose Mila were a manager, we would say she's a good manager if her set of workers sell more when they are working under Mila than when they have worked under other managers. Okay, so a good manager is one under whom subordinates have higher sales relative to their performance under prior or later managers adjusted for firm time trends. Basically, we evaluate the manager's value added. Okay. Now let me get to kind of basically our core set of results. So the first is people who sell more stuff are much more likely to be promoted. Okay, so a doubling in sales is associated with about a 35% increase in promotions. And by the way, within the sample, a doubling in sales is not unusual. What we find in sales as well as in many other settings is something called an 80-20 rule, which is there's huge heterogeneity in how productive sales workers are. 20% of the workers are responsible for about 80% of the sales because some people just are incredibly good at sales and others are not. Okay. And the fact that people who sell more stuff, okay, that they're promoted is especially true of people who are the top ranked salespeople. So if you are the top ranked sales worker within your team, you are 300% more likely to be promoted than the other people within your team. So that's what this table, you know, if we were to interpret it, shows. Okay. However, if we look at people who are actually promoted and we look at their value added as manager against their pre-promotion sales performance, we actually find a negative relation. Okay, so this is saying that people who used to be top sales workers, they tend to be less effective managers in the sense that they have lower value added. So this implies that if the firm just goes and promotes the highest performing sales workers, this is going to lead to bad managerial match because we get a set of managers that are not the most effective at making their teams increase their sales performance. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to go deep into econometrics. I will just note that whenever we're looking at comparisons within a selected sample of people who were promoted, we might worry about the selection problem, right? Suppose we see that people who used to be strong sales performers, that they're worse managers than people who were weaker sales performers, okay? If we're worried about that type of selection problem, we would essentially use a variety of instrumental variables methods to look at people who are just on the margin of promotion. So these are people who are promoted when the firm is just promoting lots of people, and people who are not promoted in kind of a more negative climate for this firm. Okay. Even among the set of marginally promoted workers, we see that those that were in the bottom tercile of sales performance, they have the highest manager value added, while those that were in the top tercile, so these are the ones that sold a lot of things, top sales performers, when they're promoted, they have less manager value added to their teams. Next, we assess other available information. So this is information that the firm has access to because we see this information as well, that actually positively predicts managers' performance. So some sales are made by working with others. So for example, one worker generates a lead and the other completes the sale, okay? Collaboration experience reflects a sales style as well as the complexity of the product, okay? So for example, if selling solar energy storage to a utility, that might need someone with a chemistry background to explain how the product works as well as the normal sales lead, okay? So what we find is about 43% of the workers in our sample are lone wolves, we call them. They have never collaborated with others on the sale. When they get a commission, they get it themselves alone, okay? So lone wolves are known to be, this is a quote from an industry publication. It says, lone wolves are the deeply self-confident, the rule-breaking cowboys of the sales force who do things their way or not at all, okay? So basically, lone wolves have low collaboration experience. And basically what we find is that for people who have collaboration experience, they're actually less likely to be promoted, okay? Lone wolves are much more likely to be promoted, okay? How do these characteristics translate into their effectiveness as manager? Well, despite the fact that people with collaboration experience being less likely to be promoted, when they are promoted, they have high value added, okay? So If the firm just wanted the best possible managers, they should actually promote people with more collaboration experience. They're not doing that. And on the other hand, they're more likely to promote these lone wolves, but these lone wolves have quite negative manager value added, okay? I personally would not want to work under someone who is a lone wolf because they might be a rather kind of like an aggressive type of manager, okay? So again, I don't want you to take from this exercise that we think that firms are making a mistake necessarily in their promotions process. Rather, firms are just in an incredibly difficult position, right? I didn't have time to cover it, but for the firms that deviate from promoting the best possible performer, the best past performer, if you don't promote a top performer, we see that top performer leave the firm, okay? They're much more likely to leave. So firms are basically trapped in a situation in which they have to reward top performers with promotions in order to retain them. But then they face this quite significant cost of not having the best possible manager, okay? We do look at why don't firms incentivize worker output in other ways? I think firms are starting to move in that direction. There currently is overwhelming use of promotion-based compensation schemes. I think part of this could be because of research by Ian Larkin. He calls his paper "Paying $30,000 for a Gold Star." Workers care about the visibility of a promotion, which money does not substitute for. Okay, so especially in the US, I think the norm is we cannot go around in our social circle and brag about getting very high pay, okay? And we don't ask each other about high pay, but we can talk about getting a promotion and we can talk about various titles, okay? And that is okay, and we admire each other and congratulate each other for titles. One quite creative solution that I'm quite hopeful about is this idea of dual career tracks. So for example, Microsoft faces a problem in which it employs many computer scientists and engineers, okay? Ideally, it would like to reward these engineers without moving an excellent engineer into management, because management requires a very different set of skills from actually doing hands-on engineering. So what Microsoft is doing is it's offering promotions in terms of title, so you can become a distinguished engineer or a lifetime distinguished engineer, but you still work as an engineer with all the associated prestige and compensation increases, and you're not a manager of engineers. So let me stop there and take just one or two questions, and I'll talk about follow-up research I've done about how firms have attempted to resolve the Peter Principle problem and how that has surprisingly, I think, in some sense, led to quite widespread gender discrimination.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So let's start with open questions in the Q&A. The first one is from Jorge Perez Seyo. He's asking, were you able to include in your controls the willingness to be promoted? For example, there is a negative side, such that the sales workers that actually they don't want to take responsibilities or don't want to be promoted because promotion means more work. How would you take that into consideration, or have you?
This is a great question. So I think anecdotally, there are some cases, particularly in, I would say, more consumers or product sales, in which the commission schedule is so aggressive that you can actually make more as a top sales worker and just collecting commissions than being a manager of sales workers. Okay. So to answer this question, we unfortunately don't know. We only observe promotion events. We don't know whether someone was offered a promotion and turned it down. I will say that in our business to business sales setting, what we find is manager compensation does typically dominate even top sales workers' compensation. So if your only goal is higher pay, within the set of sales workers that we study, even if you're a top sales worker, you would probably want to take the promotion. The other thing that we see in manager compensation is that there's not only is the level of it higher, a larger proportion of it is fixed salary relative to commissions. Okay, so in that way, you have an incentive to take the promotion because you also get greater safety in your pay because it's less volatile because a higher fraction of it is fixed salary.
Great, thank you. Another question from Ned Siegel. He is asking pretty much, if you look at the top sales individuals, right? So in your top quartile, why you actually find that they're less likely to be good managers, right? What are the characteristics of those top sales individuals that might actually lead to these results?
This is a great question. We are unfortunately in a bit of a black box in that we don't observe, day to day what they are doing. What we suspect among the variables that we do see is high sales is somewhat negatively correlated with collaboration experience. So one is these top sales workers may not be the best at kind of coordinating complex projects with lots of people involved, which is what you need to do as a manager. And again, it's in particular these lone wolves who seem to have lower value added compared to the other set of managers. Okay.
Right.
So that's as much as we can say in our data. But unfortunately, it is kind of a black box. Like, for example, why exactly does collaboration experience lead to better management? We're actually not sure. Is it the teamwork aspect of it, or is it the dealing with complexity aspect of it? We actually can't tease that apart.
Right, that's very useful. Actually, that's very, very important. Thank you. And one more question, and then we'll move to your next paper. Is talking about the Peter principle in terms of that you find that effective workers are promoted pretty much until they reach the level of incompetence. Can you maybe think outside of the business sector and maybe think of other organizations such as nonprofits or even governments? And do you see that Peter principle is applied there? Is it larger, smaller? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I believe Lawrence J. Peter in his original book was inspired to write it because he was frustrated by the organizational hierarchy of USC. So he was a professor at USC. So this is, like a more of a bureaucratic organization. And he was frustrated there by what he observed, I guess, to be people rising to their level of incompetence. So we haven't done the across, public firm versus government organization study. What I would expect to happen is that the Peter principle problem is perhaps even worse in more bureaucratic or governmental organizations. Because let's say in a competitive labor market where it is easy for firms to fire or lay off workers, if you end up promoting basically a high performing worker into a position and that worker is truly terrible, okay, well, the firm could actually just lay off this person, okay? So there is, we actually don't see many layoffs in our data, even if someone has low manager value added. So we do see, people, remaining at their level of incompetence, but there is some turnover, right? And there are layoffs and firings more so in the private sector. You compare that, which I know in a university or governmental setting, and once someone is incompetent at their job, so we accidentally promoted someone based upon past performance to a position that they are not a good match, it is now incredibly difficult to remove that person because that person just has institutionalized job security, okay? And actually, we haven't tested this, but I would very much like to. So in the original Peter Principle book, they talk about what's a way to remove someone within a governmental position, okay? You can't fire them. So all you can do is write them a glowing review so they get promoted away from you, okay? And that, that really is the only solution because you basically have an agency problem, which is, I don't want to deal with this person in my department. I can't fire them. So I only have to, I am forced to say good things about them so someone else poaches them. Okay. So you can see how this would lead to kind of disastrous consequences and bureaucratic inefficiency in organizations.
No, thank you very much. This is definitely lots of food for thought, applications and research for nonprofits, governments, universities, and potentially also corporations overseas, since they act and behave differently. So let me give you time to move to the next paper, which is very excited to look at the gender impact.
Okay. All right. So we've just talked about how if firms only promote based upon past performance, they face a Peter Principle problem. Okay. So we published this paper, and the overwhelming feedback was from many firms is, yes, we know. We're glad you studied it, but this is a problem that we are very much aware of. So it's not as though we hadn't thought about this. So we started along with the same authorship team, we started looking with actually quite a bit of excitement at what is now a commonly used solution to the Peter Principle problem. Okay. So what should promotion decisions be based on? Well, you could evaluate talent using demonstrated performance so far. The benefit of this is it can be based on relatively objective metrics like number of key performance targets met. But firms are aware that management may require a different skill set, and they're aware of this Peter Principle problem, right? Because if you only promote based upon past performance, you're going to promote people out of a role that they're good at, and you might put them into a role that they're bad at. So many firms have now adopted a common solution, which is they're going to try to directly assess a worker's potential, and they're going to both reward past performance, but also put some weight on this forecast of potential. Okay. And this seems to have many positive aspects. So if you consider someone's potential, you recognize that workers can change and grow over time. It also recognizes that the managerial role relies on a different skill set. The problem, though, is when you try to forecast someone's potential to handle new responsibilities in the future, that is just a very difficult forecasting exercise, right? It's a fundamentally imagined and subjective exercise. So it's a setting in which if you could make this forecast accurately, it would give you very valuable information. But because it's so subjective, a lot of various biases could creep in. Okay? So what we hypothesize in this follow-up research is that forecasts of people's potential may disproportionately hurt women. Okay? And we're motivated by research in social psychology on something called role congruity theory. Okay? So this is the idea that there's a mismatch between female stereotypes and stereotypes of successful leadership. Okay? So this is not necessarily about us having negative stereotypes of women. For example, we might view women as organized, conscientious, loving, caring, etc. Okay. However, these are very different from what's been shown to be the stereotypes of successful leaders, such as being results-oriented, assertive, ambitious, competitive, dominant, etc. Okay. It's also the case that when you imagine, who's going to be a great leader and manager of people, you might think about people, good managers that you've observed in the past, right? And women are just empirically less frequently observed in managerial roles. So because of this role congruity theory, people might have more negative forecasts of the managerial potential of women. Okay. Second, there's research showing that subjective forecasts may be subject to favoritism or politicking. So this is the idea that when we're making forecasts of how someone is going to do in the future, we might give more glowing forecasts to people that we are friends with, people that have given us presents, people that have sucked up to us, etc. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily about gender, but it can map back onto gender because of research showing that women seem to have less inclination, access, or returns to engaging in networking activities, self-promotion, negotiation, and even complaining, okay, when they're not being promoted. All right, so let me now turn to this follow-up paper. We're going to study evaluations and promotions in a very large North American retail chain. This is actually a very large firm that has employed over 1 million different workers during our time period. But most of those workers are kind of, they're not management track. For example, they're cashiers, okay, or stockroom people. So we're only going to focus on its 30,000 full-time salaried management track workers. And our data covers the period 2011 to 2015. Our firm evaluates workers using a very popular HR system in the past 1 or 2 decades called a 9-box grid. So in a 9-box grid, people are graded on 2 dimensions. The first is performance, 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the highest, okay? And this is a backward-looking measure of how well you performed at your current job over the past year, okay? People are also assessed on their potential, also graded 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the highest. And potential is a forward-looking projection of one's potential future contributions to the firm in either the current or a new role. So this is your ability to contribute to the firm in the future, especially if given new responsibilities, okay? And the reason why this is called a 9-box is if you cross performance rated 1, 2, 3 against potential rated 1, 2, and 3, you're going to get 9 different boxes, okay? So 9 boxes and similar grids are very widely used in HR, especially in the top levels of management, because this is viewed as a succession planning tool, okay? So based upon an informal survey of our various executive education students, we know that it's used by JP Morgan, Accenture, Bristol Myers Squibb, Intel, Cisco, General Mills. It's used by my employer, Yale, at the top levels. It's management. It's used by MIT Sloan, which is my co-author's institution. And then our third co-author, Alan Benson, is at University of Minnesota. They don't use 9-box, but they use something very similar. It's called 4-box. Okay, so that's basically performance 1, 2 crossed against potential 1, 2. Okay, so 9-box is quite important. It's used to allocate promotions, bonuses, and training opportunities. I don't want you to think about this research as us estimating, what is the causal effect of implementing 9-box, okay? Rather, this offers a window into how firms and organizations think about potential in general, okay? And it's because even when organizations don't use 9-box, they probably are thinking about potential, right? So for example, take the setting of academia, right? When we're thinking about which junior professors to hire, we make a backward-looking assessment of, what's the quality of their job market paper. But sometimes we also try, and very often we try to forecast their potential. Basically, what's this person's firepower? Are they going to go after the big, deep research questions? Do they have, let's say, option value, people will say, right? And that, I think it's an important consideration, but it's a very difficult forecasting exercise. And I'm going to say that's the forecasting part that may be subject to this type of unconscious, perhaps gender bias. Okay. So here's a preview of our results. We find that women receive substantially lower potential ratings despite having higher performance, okay? And we show that the gender gap in potential ratings accounts for up to half of the gender gap in promotions. So half of the reason why women are less likely to be promoted in our sample appears to be because they are assessed to have lower potential going forward. Now, maybe women have lower potential ratings because they indeed have lower potential. Okay, that's a possibility. But we show that these potential ratings appear to be biased based upon the data we observe. Okay, so in the sense that women actually seem to have higher realized potential, in the sense that they have higher future performance than men with the same initial performance and potential ratings. Okay, so potential should be a forecast of your future performance, especially if you're promoted. Okay, and what we find is that for men and women with the same potential ratings, women actually have higher future performance, including when they're promoted. So this says that their current potential rating was too low of a forecast. Okay. You might also think that maybe women are getting lower potential ratings because the firm is worried about losing them. Well, you can't contribute to the firm if you leave the firm, right? Within our sample, it's actually the men that have higher rates of attrition. And in fact, they are rewarded for this risk of loss, okay? So what we see is an interesting phenomenon in which, because men appear to be threatening to leave the firm, they are believed to be actually of higher potential and more likely to be promoted, okay? We don't see much updating of women's potential despite, seeing multiple years of data. And we also find that women are not necessarily better off working under female or highly rated managers. So you might think, if I work under another woman, is she more likely to recognize my potential? We don't necessarily see that in the data. We see some offsetting effects, okay? And then finally, we point to a trade-off between information and equity, okay? While we present some evidence that these potential ratings appear to be biased negatively against women, they're not complete garbage either. They really do have some predictive power for future performance. So if we were to throw away potential ratings, that is going to lead to more equality in terms of gender in the promotion process, but it decreases the efficiency of finding the best possible manager, okay? So we would argue that solutions that attempt to debias these ratings appear more promising than just reverting straight back to a Peter Principle problem, okay? So let me give you some more context and I'll show you the results. So this is a typical 9-box. You have performance 1, 2, 3 against potential 1, 2, and 3, okay? Obviously, ideally somebody has super high performance and super high potential, so you'd be a star, right? But let's look at this box here, which is the lower right. So these are workhorses, people who are judged to be high performance, but low potential for management, okay? So what we find in our data, and this is like a summary stat that kind of summarizes our paper, women are about 30% more likely than men to be classified as workhorses, okay? And men are significantly more likely to be classified in these categories here, where their performance is middling, but they are, classified as like dysfunctional geniuses or high potentials. All right, so our data again comes from a large US retail firm, and we're going to focus on just its 30,000 management track workers. What we observe is annual 9-box ratings, which are assigned by the direct manager. There's no explicit quotas or formal training in this 9-box system. And we see monthly promotion events, compensation, gender, etc. Okay. All right, so this is within our firm. So in the left plot here, this is just the set of people on the most standard retail track, okay? And we're looking at the female share. So because this is the retail industry, retail is actually majority female. And we see that in entry-level positions, which are 56% female. But as we rise in the ranks from department manager to store manager all the way up to district manager, we are down to 14% female, okay? In the right, we're looking at all workers within this firm that are considered management track. So this includes people, for example, in finance, accounting, legal, headquarters, etc., that are not on the standard retail store management track, okay? But we can break up everybody in terms of pay deciles, okay? And what we see is at the lowest deciles, this firm again starts out majority female, but once we move up to the top pay decile, we are down to 29% female, okay? Next, we can look at directly the gender gap in promotions. So we're regressing whether someone is promoted on whether they're female. And first, we're just going to control for the performance ratings and other stuff, not looking yet at potential, okay? So women, if we look at column 1, are about 1.6 percentage points less likely to be promoted than men in a given year. So this is about 15% less likely than baseline. If we condition on their performance rating, the gender gap actually increases. And I'm going to show you, this is because women actually have higher performance ratings than men. So if you compare men and women with the same performance rating, it becomes kind of more of an unexplained puzzle why women aren't being promoted, okay? And then some of these numbers change a bit once we control for other demographics and location, okay? All right, next we show the relation between compensation and how much of that can be explained by job level by year fixed effects. So this is the key row to look at down here, okay? So in column 1, this is just the raw pay gap within our firm, which approximately is quite matches the national average in retail, which is that women get paid about 12.5% less than men within our firm, okay? Between column 1 and column 2, the only difference is we're controlling for job level differences, okay? And what we see is the gender gap shrinks by more than 50%. So this is saying the majority of the gender pay gap in this firm is due to men and women occupying different positions rather than men and women getting paid different amounts within the same position, okay? Of course, it is still true, actually, that within the same position, women are being paid about 3 to 4% less, okay? But the bulk of this difference is due to basically promotions and job assignment, okay? Now let's actually look at the 9-box ratings. We're going to first start with the distribution of men's 9-box scores, okay? So here we're just looking at performance. Most men get a performance rating of 2, some get 3, which is higher, and some get low performance of 1, okay? Next, we can look at the distribution of potential ratings, okay? This firm, like many other firms, because they use potential as a promotion tool, it's very hard to get a very high potential rating. So most men actually get a low potential, some get medium potential, and very few get a potential of 3, okay? That's high potential. Now we're going to look at the relative difference between women's 9-box ratings compared to men's 9-box ratings, okay? Let's first look at performance, okay? This tells you that women are substantially more likely to get a performance rating of 3 and substantially less likely to get a performance rating of 1. So in general, women have higher performance ratings compared to men. That pattern flips once we're looking at potential ratings, which is in the far right here, okay? So women are substantially more likely to get the lowest potential rating, and they're substantially less likely to get the highest potential rating, okay? And further, it's already an achievement to get a medium potential rating of 2, and women are less likely to be rated a potential of 2, okay? All right, now let's see how much of the gender gap can be explained. So how much of the gender gap in promotions can be explained by these potential ratings, okay? So between column 1 and column 2, the change in the size of the coefficient tells you how much of the original gender gap in promotions can be explained by simply controlling for people's potential ratings, okay? And it basically drops by about half, okay? So that says, basically, these more negative assessments of women's future potential explains away about half of the gender gap in promotions. What's also interesting here is we find that potential ratings are extremely predictive of whether or not someone is promoted. Okay, so a 1-point increase in potential ratings actually matters more for promotion than a similar 1-point increase in performance ratings. So these 9-box ratings of potential seem to be very important in this promotion decision. Okay, next we basically want to assess, well, why do women have lower potential ratings? Maybe they just have actual lower potential, okay? So what is potential? The practitioner's literature defines potential as the employee's ability to contribute to the firm in the future, either through improved leadership and greater responsibilities in her original job role. So think of this like a mini promotion, taking on new responsibilities, or leadership in a new managerial role. So what if women just contribute less in the future? Maybe they have lower aspirations or lean out. And certainly if you leave the firm, you're not going to contribute in the future. So what if women are more likely to leave this firm? Okay. So what we're going to do is we examine women's realized potential. So conditional on staying in the firm, do they have lower performance? Or do they have higher attrition or leaves of absences? So here we're looking at next year's performance, both within the full sample and among the smaller sample of people who were promoted. And we're going to regress that on a dummy for whether someone is female and the past year's potential and performance ratings, okay? So the first takeaway from this table is that the potential rating, while we are arguing that is biased against women, it does contain real information. So the potential rating positively predicts future performance, okay? Both in the full sample and in the promoted sample. So it has incremental predictive power above and beyond past performance, okay? So this is valuable information, okay? However, comparing men and women with the same current set of potential ratings, women earn higher performance ratings in the future, including in the promoted sample, okay? So this tells you that the current set of potential ratings could be negatively biased against women because it underestimates their future performance. Okay. Next, we consider attrition and risk of loss. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to describe these results to you instead of showing you numbers. So the idea here is managers might give women lower potential ratings because they believe that women are more likely to leave the firm in the future, for example, to take care of children, okay? We're going to leave aside the legality of such considerations. Basically, it is actually illegal in the US to consider this information. And we're just instead going to look at the question of, are such beliefs justified by the data, okay? What we find is women within our firm actually have lower attrition, so they're less likely to leave, okay? Especially when they're passed over for promotion despite high performance. Basically, what's going on is maybe women are more likely to exit the labor force to take care of children, but men in general have very high turnover rates because they jump ship to work for another firm. Now, from the perspective of an employer, you don't care why someone is leaving. If they leave, they're not going to contribute to your firm in the future. And overall, men in our sample are actually more likely to leave this firm. And it's especially when they're passed over for high performance. So basically, if you have a high-performing woman in the sample and you don't promote her, she tends to stay. If you have a high-performing man and you don't promote him, he is more likely to leave, okay? So to retain high-performing men, firms appear to reward the threat of attrition. Workers are rated as having higher risk of loss, okay? Those workers get higher potential scores, promotions, and wages. Women are rated at lower risk of loss, and that's correct. They are at lower risk of loss. But essentially, the evidence is consistent with women, by not threatening to leave, give their managers the impression that they are lower potential. Okay, and they're hurt as a result. Okay. We also look at leaves of absences directly. So women are relatively much more likely to take leave. But this effect, when we do a calibration, does not seem large enough to explain the gender gap. Okay. So let me summarize both this paper, and I'll give you some overall conclusions before I'm happy to stick around and have a discussion, take questions. For both papers, what we show is that firms are actually in a difficult position, okay? They're trying to solve the Peter Principle problem by making these subjective assessments of potential. Those end up appearing to be biased against women. We also show that firms fail to update potential ratings even after seeing realized female performance. Dropping potential ratings, completely we would go back to a Peter Principle problem. And the problem still exists even under female managers. So, if we just allowed women to make these ratings, the problem does not go away. So how could we debias potential ratings? Some of it might be unconscious bias. But some of it appears to be strategic bias. So perhaps we could rethink how much we want to reward people who are threatening to leave, okay? Because it seems to be a highly gendered threat. And what we find is that people who threaten to leave, they really are more likely to leave. So in a probabilistic sense, they really are less likely to contribute to the firm in the future. Do we want to reward this set of people? Okay. And then finally, perhaps we could move towards screening algorithms that have less bias. Okay. So we keep on trying to forecast potential, but instead of using people to make these forecasts and including kind of our biases, possibly unconscious, can we try to make these forecasts more algorithmically? And in terms of overall conclusions, I was thinking about this presentation. I was worried that I was giving you kind of very pessimistic empirical facts, right? So is this all bad news? I don't think so. So, one upside is it tells you that forecasts of potential, as noisy as they do seem to contain valuable information. So instead of abandoning this exercise entirely, maybe we should just focus on trying to debias them. And then second, I'm hoping that I'm hoping to do more research on this. I'm hoping to inspire all of you to do more research on this, is that maybe we should start using dual career tracks. So this idea that we're going to call people distinguished career scientist, or for example, we reward Mila, who's been doing a fantastic job, by giving her a chaired professorship, right? Instead of necessarily moving her into a management position. So we recognize her academic accomplishments, right, with a title, rather than completely changing her job role as the only way to recognize her accomplishments. Okay, so I'll end it, my direct presentation there. I'm very happy to just discuss more and take questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kelly. So a couple of questions. I will combine some questions from the audience, also the questions that were emailed to us ahead of time, and some of my own questions. So let's start with the first one. So I really love your innovative work on the Peter Principle and the gender lens in which you look at this problem. So as actually my own personal colleague, Katie Kaminsky, who became a successful hedge fund manager, she was quoted saying, there are a lot of mediocre men in the finance industry, and we need more mediocre women. So when do you think actually the Peter Principle will apply to women, especially at the higher echelons of power, like top executive jobs in finance?
It seems like there's research in social psychology essentially showing perhaps that even when men have mediocre past performance, as long as they really advocate for themselves, people might get the sense, correctly or incorrectly, that they are high potential and they still get promoted, okay? Whereas women can only get promoted when they have been really strong past performers, okay? And I think, in terms of how this affects upper level management, unfortunately, assessments of potential and really the use of the 9-box grid is concentrated at the very, very top. I think this is a rational behavior on the part of firms, because at the very top, once you get promoted, you have a very different set of responsibilities compared to your previous role. So then it's where the Peter Principle would be most extreme. So then you want to focus instead on predicting potential. Whereas, for example, if you were lower down and, for example, you were junior sales associate and now you're like regular sales associate, you're still sales, okay? In which case you don't take on really a different job role. What that means, though, is I think the problems that I'm highlighting here, the kind of the challenges, actually appear more at kind of the middle to the top tier of management, where you see firms trying to think about, what is someone's potential.
Yes. So one of kind of to connect to this anonymous attendee, I'm just kind of getting questions that are related to what you just mentioned is, so in this case, should women actually focus on demonstrating potential and actually not be good in terms of kind of don't concentrate and don't spend as much time on a good performance metric, but actually try to focus on demonstrating potential, or still will be biased against that?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what women can do to further their promotion prospects, this research suggests that, you know, one is essentially by, like, instead of just displaying loyalty and being assessed as low risk of loss, it could actually be quite effective to basically talk about your outside offers, give a sense that, you know, you're on the market, etc. Okay, that because the inference from management seems to be, oh, other people want to hire you, you must be high potential, right? But I don't want to say this will definitely work, because there is some interesting evidence that says basically the same kind of aggressive strategies that men currently employ in labor market negotiations and self-advocacy. If women apply those same aggressive techniques, it can sometimes backfire, because, you know, we accept that behavior from men and may even reward it, but we view that as overly aggressive, perhaps, when women employ that behavior. So yeah, I will also say, I find it personally frustrating that a lot of the advice for how to deal with, you know, inequality in the labor market is for women to change their behavior and, you know, behave in some kind of different way, you know, kiss up more, advocate for themselves more, be more boastful, basically, right? I think an alternative thing that could happen, which would be preferable, is firms change their HR policies. Like, does it make sense to reward people who advocate for themselves so aggressively and keep on threatening to leave and talking about, you know, how great they are, right? We could just choose to reward these behaviors less.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. So actually, this is let's ask a couple of more questions. One will be on senior position, then I will ask about HR. So the senior position is, you know, some of my questions, some questions I'm combining with Pierre Chagnon and with Paloma Rodriguez Martinez. So if we concentrate on kind of a bit on senior positions, why do you think fewer women are promoted to senior positions than men? So how are the managerial skills evaluated for women versus men? And do they have the same executive compensation? Also from Paloma, they mentioned that, you know, looking about the care gap, right? Women tend to take care of dependent people or even leave the jobs. And Pierre mentioned that, you know, in terms of when we look at the senior, right? So this is a question about senior executives. This is the time when they're having children. So we might not have that gap for people who just graduated, who are our students just graduated from MBA or PhDs, but once they have children, you will have those. So how do you capture it in your demographic controls, and what are your thoughts about it?
So we have considered all of these questions quite carefully, because I think they're important issues to consider. You know, the overarching concern we had was, what if some women are actually offered promotions, but they actually turn them down because it requires a significant increase in responsibilities or a relocation? And especially for women who are caregivers for other children, other members of the family, they may not be willing, for example, to relocate to headquarters or have a massive increase in hours. So they could actually turn down promotions, right? And a limitation of our data is we only see promotion events, not promotion offers, and whether someone said yes or no. So, you know, so through our analysis, we think there is some truth to some women, some part of the gender promotion gap really is due to women saying no to certain promotion opportunities. What we see is there's a very large gender gap for promotions that require relocation to headquarters or another state. And that gender gap in promotions is not well explained by differences in potential ratings, okay? So we think, you know, that would be consistent with just women saying, no, I can't move right now, okay? And it also, that we've looked at age differences. that gender gap in unwillingness to kind of take a promotion that requires relocation is particularly strong among those of in an age group, let's say around late 20s to 40. You're in charge of young children. Okay, it's hard to relocate. Okay, however, there's a different set of promotions that don't require, so the bulk of the promotions that we actually see in our sample don't require relocation. So you're already in headquarters, okay? You get to stay in headquarters, okay? And it doesn't involve an increase in the number of subordinates. So it's not obvious that, you know, your span of responsibility goes up. So that accounts for 90% of the promotions that we see. And there, that gender gap in promotions maps on very well to gender gaps in potential ratings. So within that sample, we think it's a set of women who are more willing to take the promotion, but they're not being offered because they're getting low potential ratings.
Great, thank you. Another question is interesting in terms of kind of the last conclusion in terms of potential biases and screening. And also obviously, you know, you have data on women. There was a question in terms of is there any minority or ethnicity breakdown? And that also leads to the question on bias. So if the question is the following, given the current development in AI, artificial intelligence, and already a widespread of use into screening and hiring workers of the AI technology, do you actually think that AI will introduce less bias, more bias? Will it help with some of the constraints that you mentioned? Or like, will it be better at screening, better performing managers? Or will it actually bring its own set of problems?
So I think there are exciting, possibly scary advances on the horizon in terms of how AI could be used as part of labor market screening. We already know from existing research that especially for executive level talent search, as well as the hiring of MBAs, it is very, very common to use psychometric tests of personality. You just look at basically the dominance of this firm, Pi Metrics. So a ton of our MBAs from Yale, when they graduate, they have to take this battery of tests to basically tell their employer, reveal to their employer their personality traits, and they're being screened on this as part of hiring. We also know with executive search, potential candidates are given, you know, very long tests spanning an entire day or two in which the executive search firm tries to assess their personality. Okay. Now, the problem with many of these tests is, you know, they might be gameable, right? Like if you know someone's looking for a conscientious worker, right? You might try to respond in a very conscientious way. And where AI is going is, I think there are ways to infer your personality from your observable public history in a way that is much more difficult to game and can pretty accurately also assess your personality characteristics. So one project that I'm working on with a number of co-authors is, and this is quite scary, it's possible now to infer personality just from a static photo of someone, and it's quite correlated with survey measures. Okay? So like if stuff like this ends up being used in HR, I think it's both exciting in that it's a wealth of information, but you can imagine how if used without careful guidance, it could lead to, well, one is it's not clear that how the impact is going to be on different groups. It's not something that I can necessarily control. It's not clear whether this is going to be legal. So lots of open questions in terms of how AI might be used for labor market screening. But we basically know that there's a ton of stuff that predicts how well someone can do. And if you let AI just run predictive algorithms, it's going to give you a lot of predictive power.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shue, and Professor Young, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for a wonderful talk, and thank you, Mila, for your moderation. So today we do have an over-representation of a woman. It's not planned that way, so we do have 3 women here, even though in the profession we have only about 20% women. So this is a perfect transition, thanks Mila, to talk about AI and AI application in corporate governance. So the last slide is Professor Sean Kao from Maryland, University of Maryland Accounting Department. He will lead this public lecture on methodology. This is going to be how do you apply the AI tools for governance research. I want to comment really briefly on Kelly's suggestion. So once I had some external offers and I didn't know whether I'm going to take it, so I debate whether I should tell my dean or not. So I talked to some male colleagues. He told me you should tell the entire world. So that's that shows a little bit whether we think slightly differently, because I feel like I have my loyalty to the institution. If I don't know where I'm going, I'm less willing to reveal the information, to bargain anything with my dean. But my colleague was thinking very differently. That's just one data point rather than research. So let's conclude today's public lecture. Thank you all for attending our lecture, regardless of your time zone. And I hope to see you soon on May 13th on the application for AI tools for corporate governance. You have a great rest of your day. Good night and early good morning again. Bye. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Mila.